Good morning, class.
Good morning.
The days that the bombs dropped on Pearl Harbor, I was out northeast of a little town called Ortonville, Minnesota, straight west of here, hunting jackrabbits. I was just a kid. I just turned 16 on December 7th or a few days before that. And it never dawned on me that I would ever be caught up in a war. But it wasn't long before my little town began to lose its able-bodied men and women. Incidentally, women played a major role in the service, waxen nurses and Red Cross girls and so forth. In fact, later I'll explain how I was connected with one of them. Wow. Anyway, so I had to quit school my senior year and go to work for my dad in his meat market because he lost his help to the war. So he had a meat market in a slaughtering company. And I was working 60, 70 hours a week, scalding hogs and butchering cows and carrying quarters of beef that weighed more than I did. I could hardly wait to get into the war. So I enlisted. I was in the Army Air Corps. I wanted to be a fighter pilot. It seemed like every kid in America wanted to be a pilot. When I got to Fort Snelling, the induction center, I flunked the physical. I had a compound fracture of this left arm when I was a little kid, and it was really never set properly, so I have this little handicap. I was climbing the tree, looking in birds' nests, looking at their eggs that I had a collection. I was kind of a strange little boy, and that hasn't changed a lot. Anyway, what happened? They offered me limited service. That means I could drive a truck or type. I said, I want to be a fighter pilot. Well, sorry, soldier, this has to go in your record. So my next station was basic training. Everybody in the military goes to basic training. It's the starting point. Kids from all over America come to this one location. Kid from Boston can't speak the language. It isn't a bottle with a metal cap, it's a bottle with a metal cap. The kid from Arkansas, you can't understand his accents. The kid from Texas was tall and mean, and a kid from Clascanine, Oregon was a farm boy, strange looking dude. And I was from Minnesota, so that all they could think of was Minnesota. Everyone was Scandinavia in those days. Well, suddenly the sergeant yelled, "Tench hut," and all of us were standing there. Now we were focused on the sergeant. He was so sadistic. He ran us until we dropped. We did push-ups till our arms and shoulders gave out. And the kid from Texas helped me out with my backpack when I couldn't make it on bivouac during the rain. And this Clascanine kid, we stood in ranks, and we were trying to figure out how to put the sergeant away. Maybe we could trample him to death on our next run. And so suddenly the focus was no longer on we focused on the sergeant. And that was the purpose, to bring us together and bond us as buddies. Then they shipped us out. I went to Gunnery school in Las Vegas, Nevada. And it was fun. They began to treat us like people. In fact, we'd get Class A passes and go to town. But a soldier only made $50 a month, a veteran, a private. And after they took out $18.75 for a war bond and another $6.40 for life insurance policy, that left us with about $28. But one roll of the dice in Las Vegas and it was gone. But that was soon to change. My buddy, Bud Riley, came to me one day. He was dangling a $20 bill in my face. He says, "Parker, we're rich." His mother had enclosed it in the folds of a letter. We went to town, we rode horseback. Finally, she began to enclose it with every letter, and she'd write a couple times a week, and Bud would come up and, "Hey, Parker, we're rich." We'd go to town, and we'd go to the gambling halls and ride horseback. We even went to one Burley show. But poor Mrs. Riley, if she'd only known her contribution to her son's life of sin and debauchery, she would have been out of her mind, but that wasn't the case. We were young. Soon, with droopy eyes and tired feet, we were on the bus waiting to go to our next assignment. Our next assignment was Dyersburg, Tennessee. It's a sleepy little town in northwestern Ohio, in Tennessee rather. And there we came together as crew. There were 10 men on a B-17 bomber crew. This will probably give you a little better, if we can keep this up here. So we learned how to fire machine guns. I was the tail gunner, and I had 2 heavy caliber machine guns. You'll see them sticking out here. We had more fun. We had 50 caliber bullets. I don't know if I brought one with me. I might have. And yeah, here it is. This is the shell that we fired in those guns. Right there. Deadly. In fact, we were flying over some targets in Tennessee, in the hill country. We were learning to fire our machine guns. And down below there was a river with some barges on it filled with gasoline. And so when we pulled the triggers on our guns, if we hit one of the barges, it would explode. And it was really exciting. We'd go from one shot to the other, and suddenly my gun exploded, one of them. It blew up, blew the cover group off, threw me back, and I got powder burns on my legs. What happened? I held the machine gun too long. When you fire a machine gun, you fire it in short bursts. Brr, brr. Theoretically, if you put both guns together with the triggers down, and there's 800 rounds of ammunition back here, 400 in each box, you'd shoot all of your ammunition in less than a minute. Well, you have to shoot short bursts. And what happened, it got so hot in this machine gun that it exploded when the cartridge went in, and they landed, they gave me a tetanus shot. I couldn't get a Purple Heart for that mission. So, incidentally, when we were down at Dyersburg, this little Bud Riley, who I befriended in basic training, came to me one day. He'd been crying. I said, Bud, what's wrong? I don't cry. You know, we're 18 years old. He said, my sister came down here today to see me before I go off to war, and she fell in love with my co-pilot. She's only been here 3 days, and they're going to get married. I said, Bud, call your mother. He said, I did all she could do. Ball. They got married. Now Bud's co-pilot with his brother-in-law. 2 guys on the same ship. You may have heard Saving Private Ryan. Does that movie mean anything to it? So they didn't like relatives in the same area. Like the Sullivan boys went down to a watery grave in the Pacific, and they changed the rules. But this was a case of circumstance to have 2 guys on the same aircraft. Later we'll tell you why that was a bad idea. So once we got out of there, we went home on furlough to be with your family one last time before they ship you off for war. It was fun. I saw my girlfriend, and Virginia Volz. Spent some time with her and the folks and so forth. And then we went back to Lincoln, Nebraska, and formed a group, and were shipped out to the East Coast, boarded the ship. It was called the AFHS-Mn. It was a French ship with about 5,000 troops and Red Cross people and so forth, and steamed across the Atlantic. We came into the Mediterranean, and we hugged the coast of North Africa, and then went straight across. They were worried about submarines, because there's still a lot of active things. We went straight across to the city of Naples. We came into Naples early in the morning. There was only one trail in and out of that harbor. What happened when Mussolini was removed from power, the Italian army caved in and didn't fight anymore. And Hitler was so mad that he lost his southern ally. In his insane fury, he ordered the city of Naples to be destroyed. And you just can't believe what that harbor was like. There were ships poking out all over. And there was just a trail in and out. Our engineers did a good job of fixing that up so we could get out and down. When I went down to the gangplank with my duffel bag, down below on the wharf, there was a ship under the water with its smokestacks under the water on its side, and we built the wharf right over the top. And when we got to land, across the wharf, here were 5 little Italian girls. I've got a picture somewhere of this. In ragged, little cotton, dirty, ragged dresses. Their hair was a mess, lice, and they were all smiling. The reason they were smiling is because the soldiers were passing out candy bars to them. And cigarettes. Now they didn't smoke. The cigarettes were the coin of the realm. It was used for barter. They could give it to their folks. It was my first helping of what the results of war can be. That whole city was just terrible. And Mount Vesuvius was over here to my right, and it was still active at the time. And there was a little halo around it, as if to say, I didn't do it this time. You probably remember the history there. Blew up and all these people became drowned in cinders. Well, we moved inland at that point, and we pitched tents, and we started to fly our combat missions. I have a list of my missions here. In Italy, I had to fly either 50 missions or 35 sorties. A sortie is a trip to the target and back. A mission was much longer than that. Now the reason for that is when we bombed targets in northern Italy, it was maybe a 5-hour mission. But when we went up around Berlin, it was a 9 or 10-hour mission. So it wasn't fair if a guy just caught all the northern missions. So they changed the rules. So you either had to fly 35 sorties or 50 missions if you went past the 49th parallel. That was way deep into enemy territory. They gave you credit for a double. I flew 41 missions. I was still there when the war was over, and I'm glad it was over. And I'm going to go right now and talk to you about some of these missions. My first mission was November 18th, 1944. I didn't know what to expect. The night before, I laid in my tent and I could hear them gassing up the planes out on the airfield. And I could hear a rivet gun where they were fixing up some old bomber that hardly got home. And the trucks gassing up. You got up about 3:30. And in Italy at that time, it was in the wintertime, it was muddy and it was cold. And we had to shave first because we wore oxygen masks at high altitude. And so nobody had a beard or a mustache in those days. You had to have a clean face. Then we would trudge down to the mess hall and sit there at picnic tables. The officers were on one side and the enlisted men were on another. Then we had powdered eggs and powdered milk, and it was pretty good. Especially at the first mission, he was a little apprehensive. We didn't talk an awful lot. Finally, we were done with our chow, and we went outside with our mess kits. There were 3 barrels out there with gasoline fire on them. The first barrel, you put your junk that you didn't eat there. The next one, you put in swishes it out in this hot water, down to the third one, and you go back to the tent and hang it on the tent pole. My wife would have never liked that way to do dishes. Believe me, it wasn't very sanitary. But somehow we were young and ready. Then we went to the briefing. You may have seen this in the movies, where everybody gathers in one room, and up front, there's a map covered. And underneath that map is the story of where we're going to go that day on our mission. Before they unveiled that map, a chaplain would come out, and everybody would hang their heads, say a prayer, and then when that was over, they had a Protestant and a Catholic, so both were there. Not, you know. So anyway, just thought I'd throw that in there for you guys. Then they throw the cover off the map, and there it was from where we were to our target. Oh no, Vienna. Vienna was a tough target. They had several hundred guns, and they knew how to use them. So, Floresdorf, Vienna. I'm riding back here in the tail. I'm all dressed up in my uniform, which happens to be long winter underwear, little booties that were heated, hooked to a wire seat. It was 50 below zero. And in addition to that, we had a suit that hooked into, a pair of pants, and the jacket, and the gloves, the helmet, parachute harness, and a Mae West under that. If you had to bail out over water, you had this little flotation device, and by pulling a couple cartridges, it would expand it, and then hope that you'd get help if you could spot you. And over the target, shells were always exploding. And the only protection we had was this heavy suit, this body armor, along with a helmet that was steel with 2 earlobes on it. So what would happen on that mission, once we got up to high altitude, over 10,000, you don't have oxygen. 10 to 12, you have to go on oxygen. So we go back, I would wiggle my way, throw my parachute past the tail wheel in the bomber, you get back there, hook up my oxygen line, with a blinker on that, my heated suit line. We had a throat mic so that we could talk to each other. There was communication inside the aircraft. And that was kind of nice, to have a relationship with the 9 other guys and to tell them what was happening. So we went over the target that day, and it's what you might call a milk run. When you didn't have a lot of problems, they called it a milk run. And most of them weren't milk runs. On the way home, we let down so we could get off of our oxygen masks. And suddenly I heard, "Get out, get out." And I looked to my right, and 2 B-17s had collided. One came up underneath the other one, and instantly the pilots and these were killed by the propellers from the plane above. I found out this out after the war. I was able to talk to a guy who was in that aircraft. He sent me the story of what happened. The plane flipped over, went down, and I saw several parachutes just before it exploded. Now, I didn't know that, those people. I'd just gotten over there. 6 of those guys were killed. When we lost somebody that we trained with, that we knew, close to our tents, that was tough. But this other stuff was kind of impersonal. It's not that you didn't care, it's just that you didn't know them, so you couldn't share it. I wrote a story about that, and they printed it in the paper. This is me sitting on the tail of a B-17. The pilot took that picture. He said, "Parker, if you don't get home, I'll send this picture to your mom." Well, I said, "Clancy, if I don't get home, you won't get home." So we got a dual purpose to save each other. Anyway, they put this in our 301st Bomb Group magazine. And the guy in the top plane spotted that story. He called me and he sent me a story about what happens to both of those aircraft. And real interesting. The guy in the plane was the only survivor. That one plane landed in Yugoslavia for the time being. Now, what's next? Okay, I never had to fire my guns at enemy aircraft. They were there. For several reasons, I didn't have to. Early in the war, they stopped attacking the tail. It was too dangerous. They would come out of the sun on pursuit curve at about maybe 350 miles an hour. They would come in and they would have to line up in the back behind the tail. And they could only shoot when they were out about 300 yards. We could take them out at 600 yards. And they lost 150 miles an hour, the speed of our bomber. So now they're down to about 200 miles an hour, and it was too dangerous for them. Besides, they knew I was the best gunner in the Air Force, so they stayed away from the tail that I was in. In addition, it was all those swastikas I had painted on the back. Stay away from that guy over there on the 32nd button run. They changed their tactics and came in from the front. They go right for the pilot's compartment. They take one shot at it, right up here. They come in sometimes in half roll upside down. They take a shot, they roll over, and they were gone. The only guy that could get a shot on them was this guy down here in the lower ball turret. Yes, on December 19th, 1944, we bombed a target called Blechhammer. It was in North Germany. And we lost an engine. Losing one engine out of 4 isn't that serious, but it could be depending on other circumstances in the aircraft. We lost an engine just as we were over and dropped our bombs. So we couldn't stay up with the group. So what happened, we dropped back, we're up in northern Germany, all alone, with a ship that's damaged, and we had to fly home. If you go outside today and you look up in the sky, you'll see a plane, let's say a single plane. Sometimes it'll have vapor trails, so you can spot it right away. Well, if you were a German and you looked up, saw an American aircraft, got miles to fly over your territory, you're going to run up there and take them down. Well, fortunately, our navigator got us home. And to this day, none of us were so prepared to be intercepted, but they didn't. Oh, I was in the Holocaust Museum. I was just telling my friend over here that some time back, I was in the Holocaust Museum. And I was standing on the 4th floor, and I was looking at Auschwitz and what horrible things that happened there. You know that history probably in your class. And the crematory and the building where they went in 2000 at the time. And here's this little 19-year-old tail gunner flying right over them 5 miles. I didn't know what was happening on the ground. They were just little pieces. But when I was there in the hall, I looked up and I saw Blackhammer. Well, we bombed that time. Then I realized, and I read a lot of this stuff after the war that I could connect with me in my relationship with the war. We were all little pieces of the war. We didn't have the grand picture. In fact, Roosevelt, Stalin, and Churchill knew that there was a prison camp down there. And they thought about bombing it, but they got together and said, well, we won't. The railroad going in. Well, they decided to take that same, not waste the mission, they just build the railroad, and they let, there's a lot of controversy over that. So I'm just down here. Yes, on December 25th, Christmas Day, I flew over the target. 3 times. My mother and dad gave me a wristwatch for Christmas in 1943. So when we went over the target, we went over Brooks, and Captain Vincent must have been leading the group, because they called him Fearless Joe Vincent, because he did crazy things when he led the group. So when the shell started to explode, I would wiggle past my ammunition boxes that were right in here, and I would go to my escape hatch. And I was the only one on a B-17 with his own escape hatch. And I spent a little time there once in a while. All I had to do was wiggle past my ammunition boxes, watch my little oxygen hole to make sure I was getting oxygen, and look at the door handle. I had my flak suit on, one link on my parachute. I was all set to get out of it. Too many things happened up there. And I was, so what happened was I would listen to, on the intercom, I would hear the terms of bomb bay doors open. Now the IP, the point where everybody turns in and goes over the target, lasts from about 5 to 20 minutes. So I'd be sitting there counting the minutes, the bomb bay doors open, and suddenly you'd hear bombs away and the ship would lift. But just as relieved as we were that the bombs were out of there, and we would turn and make a diving and form up with the group and head for home. And at that time, sometimes it was a mess because the aircraft, we lost some, but some fell back and so forth. Well, on this mission, Christmas Day, I didn't hear bombs away. We did a 300 and went around over the target again. I didn't know why. We didn't drop our bombs. Again, we didn't drop. Around we went. We went over that target 3 times. And I was thinking about to replace fear with fantasy. I look at my mother's wristwatch and I realized 1 year ago today, my twin sister was under the Christmas tree with me. And now here's her brother, twin brother, you know, in combat. She already had an older brother that was in a hospital in England because he'd so badly wounded in France. My poor mother must have done an awful lot of praying, just like her son when I went over the target. So finally, we dropped our bombs and we got out of there. And after the war, they bounced me around. I was waiting to be discharged. I had enough points from combat. And I was in a nightclub bar down, I think, Orlando. And I could hear Captain Brent sing. He was such a noisy officer. He was a major at the time. And I walked over and I said, Major Brent, sir? Yeah, what do you want, Sergeant? I said, where were you Christmas Day, 1944? Were you there? I said, yeah. Who was your pilot? Kelly was my pilot. We didn't always fly with the same officers. Oh, you got the shot on it, yes. And I said, yeah. He said, were you mad? I said, yes, I was mad. When we got home, the mess hall was closed. So, we were just kind of kidding around. So he yelled, "Buy the sergeant a drink." Well, I was a teetotaler, but I had to have a beer with him. And we went to places in the sky with very few of them. There was no rank. He wasn't a major. I wasn't a sergeant. We were buddies because we'd been there. Oh, incident, over that target, Christmas Day, I would look around my oxygen, my boxes with my ammunition, and my oxygen blinker, because if you lost oxygen, you were in trouble real soon. And the blinker, I would fantasize that was my girlfriend back home kissing me when I looked at the blinker. It helped replace the fear. Incidentally, when we got home, she was kissing somebody else. So. All right, where are we? Okay. On January 21st, we bombed a place in Vienna. Vienna was a terrible target. And over the target, the navigator would always call for oxygen check, to check up on us. Starting at the tail, we would call in that we were okay. We'd bounce around. Well, the guy in the radio room didn't answer. So we went around again, and the guy in the radio room and one of the waist gunners didn't answer. Trouble. The pilot called me and he said, "Parker, what's going on back there?" Well, I could look past the tail through the waist and I could see that Faust, our radio guy, was on the floor, out cold. And Patchy, our waist gunner, was trying to get oxygen into him. And I reported this to Clancy. And he said, "We're going down." And he put the bomber in a power dive from 28 to 12,000 feet to get to oxygen-rich air to save this guy. We pulled out, and we did save him. But he was never the same after that. He lost oxygen too long. But on the way down, he radioed the crew, "Prepare to bail out." Well, of course, I was always ready. I was at that escape hatch when things like that happened. And after the war, he said, "Don't bail unless you hear the emergency bell." He had a little switch by his knee. And once he hit that, the bells rang at every station. But after the war, I was looking through a manual, and I'll leave these folders with your group leader. And I discovered that there was no bell in the tail. The circuitry didn't reach the bell. Here's my machine gun. And in the back of this, there was no bell in the tail. I wouldn't have heard it. The guys would have bailed out and waved goodbye to me. This is the way it looked over the target all the time. That's exploding flat. And you couldn't get away from it. You had to fly straight and level through it to bomb the target. And that's when bad things started to happen. This was taken over in Vienna. There's one bomber up here with his bomb bay doors open. He's probably in trouble. And there's some down here that are heading for home. Once we landed, it was like getting your life back. And they gave you 2 shots of whiskey. Well, I was a teetotaler. I didn't drink. I was just out of Sunday school when I got in the service back to the church. So I would take my whiskey and I would put it in a vino bottle. And I would hide it behind the clothes rack in the tent because my engineer liked booze. And I think it might have been a little bit related to the job he had and the things he went through. So I came in the tent one day, and here was South on his bunk with my jug there between his knees. "Hey, Parker, how would you like a drink on you?" So that's the way it was. We were all kids. Now, where are we going to go? 2, 3. Yes, we took off one day for a target called Hagen's Home. It was in Hungary. We just got up to 10,000 feet where I had to get into my battle station when the ship began to shake, really violent. And of course, I went right to my escape hatch. I didn't know what was happening. And then there was a boom, boom. What happened was and it lost the ship. It tore off, it went through the wing, and it cut a great chunk of my horizontal stabilizer off. This part here on the plane, when it sliced through it. And the pilot called the navigator, who sits down here, And he said, "We getting home." He said, "Find me a place to land this airplane." That's almost what happened to us. So we landed in the pasture. And no one was wounded because we haven't even hit the target yet. And suddenly the partisans showed up. That was Tito's gang that had the countryside pretty well under control, even though we were in enemy territory. And one of the kids jumped off his bicycle, ran up to my engineer, and he shook him and he said, "Cigarette, Joel?" Cigarettes were the coin of the realm, like those little girls there in Naples. I had a package. Everybody smoked, unfortunately. It was just the way it was. If you watch the old movies, you see everybody smoking. And a lot of them died with cancer. My dad did. He smoked too much. But anyway, so what happened after that? We waited for help. Our radio man called our base in Italy, and they flew a twin-engine C-47 in to rescue us. That was kind of the Jeep of the sky, the C-47. It came in real low, so it was under radar, turned, and stopped. And the door flew open, and here's a nurse. And here's 10 young guys rushing. "She's mine!" We all yell. You know. There's a doctor on board also. And we all piled in, took off. We flew back over the Adriatic, landed, went back to my tent, and my waist gunner hadn't been on that mission because they bumped him for a photographer. We didn't always fly as a full crew. And he was crying. He'd heard that he lost his crew. Now here we were. Many years later at a reunion, I pointed this out to him. He said, "The reason I was crying, I knew where your whiskey was, Parker." So that's the way we were. So let's see here now. We're done with that mission. One day, we were up just south of Berlin, about 65 miles away, at a target called Rulen. It was a synthetic oil target. One of the reasons the war didn't go on for anything like that, we bombed all their oil targets. They ran out of fuel, and they were very industrious, and they had ways of making artificial fuel. So we went after those targets. Well, there was one up there at Rulen, and we came in to bomb. And the ball turret flyer, this old one, called up and he said, a shell had exploded right under his position down there. And he says, "Anybody got a windshield wiper up there? There's juice flowing all over the ball down here." It was hydraulic fluid from the brakes. We dropped back because we had other damage. And the pilot called me. And he said, "Parker, have you got your parachute back there?" I said, "Come on, Buzz." He said, "We may have to throw out your parachute." I said, "I'm going with it." "Your choice," he said. What happened is we have no brakes. We probably have no tires. So we're going to have to rig a parachute in the tail. And so what happened, you can see here, this is me looking out the tail of a B-17. I'm waving. This was taken on dry land. I rigged up a parachute and put it on this ledge. The idea was to use it as a brake when we came in. You've probably seen this in the movies. The crash will land and the parachute comes out to slow them down. That was the purpose of this. Well, there I was with this parachute, my hand ready to let it go. And all the way in on the landing pattern, Clancy called and he said, "Don't do it, Parker, unless I tell you." Because I would have really messed him up if I let that go at high altitude. So suddenly, the runway is streaming out behind me, gravel. "Parker, I don't need it." So I threw it down. We used the entire length of the runway because we didn't have any tires, and the brakes didn't work. And at the end, we ground looped, and we were in the gas. I'm watching all of this, what's going to happen, and stopped. And the pilot came back to me, and he grabbed me, and he said, "Parker, you did a good job." And I said, "Clancy, I didn't do anything." He said, "That's what I mean." You didn't have to do anything. So things like that were happening all the time. Oh, my ball there. Wrote a book, a manual. It's in here somewhere. And in that manual, he explains all of these missions that I'm telling you about. It almost seems like fiction of things that happened to us up there. but he wrote every mission that I've done and what happened in detail. 40 years after the war, I got a phone call. The guy on the other end of the line said, "This is Gunnery." "Gunnery," I said. A lot of my friends are Gunnery. You got to go deeper. He said, "This is David Davis. I was a navigator on your B-17 in Italy. You were the tailgater." I said, "David, how did you find me and why?" "Well, I'm having lunch with my daughter, and I'm telling her I got all these scars on the lower half of my body. And I tell her about my crew, this wild tail gunner from Ortonville, Minnesota. She says, 'Dad, call him. Call him.' After all these years, said, 'I found your sister-in-law in Big Stone, South Dakota, and she led you to meet her.'" That inspired me to search for my crew. 40 years after it was over, we had to put it behind us. We came home, we found a job, and we got married, and we had babies, and in that order, by the way, strange as it seems to this generation, and put the war behind us. Now the door opened up. The door opened up for one of my crew members. It inspired me to search for them and have a reunion. I found 5 of them that I put together in my home north of Stillwater. And the other one, the guy that lost the oxygen, lived down in Arizona. He couldn't come. But we went to his home 2 years in a row to be with him. I can't explain how close we were. We were closer than friends. We were really buddies. We were in our 60s. Some of them got off the airplane, and I met them. We're jumping around in McDonald's out there, hugging each other. These guys are strange. So anyway, I'll get more to him later. So let's see here now. Let's see. We bombed a place called Padua in northern Italy. It was a target that you had to bomb because the Germans were shipping, it was a marshalling yard. The Germans were shipping equipment up into the Eastern Front, also into northern Italy, around Verona. And we went up there and we bombed that target a number of times. What we would do is we would take off from our base in Foggia, and we would swing out over the Adriatic and fly over water as long as we couldn't shoot at us over water. Then we turned up in north and went into this little community of Padua. And it was terrible. Over northern Italy, they had so many guns concentrated. And we finally dropped our bombs, but our aircraft was in such bad shape that we didn't think we could make it back. 2 engines were feathered. There's 4 engines in the bomber, and 2 of them were feathered in the inboard, and 2 outside were running 3/4 power. There's no way that we could have gotten back to base if we hadn't been south of the Alps. A lot of our targets were 8-10 hours up north of the Alps. The Alps were about 12,000 feet, and we couldn't maintain that altitude. The engineer called the crew and he said, "Prepare to crash. We may not have a good landing. Get in the radio room." So the ones that were essential on the aircraft all got in the radio room, put our arms around each other, spoon style, and waited. What happened was, when we came in to land, incidentally, the navigator stayed up front. He should have been with us. But what happened, he had to see what was going on, my friend that I had the reunion with. As we came in to land, engine number 4, the engine way to the, began to run away. The pilot couldn't control the aircraft, and just as we touched down, we crashed into 5 C-47s, that twin engine plane I mentioned to you. The first one we hit, we cut the nose off them. You can't see the sequence there. The second one we hit, we cut right in 2. That took us into the 3rd one. And that crashed into the 4th one. And we're in the radio room, all messed up. The guy in my lap slammed into the back, jamming equipment. He got a Purple Heart later because of it. And fortunately, the waist door opened. We thought it might have been askew because of the crash. And we ran out. There was fire and explosions all over the place. And I ran out towards the runway because it was right there. And here comes a B-17 right after him. I'm the only guy probably that was ever chased down the runway by a B-17 bomber. And I turned and slammed right into the radio guy who was running behind me. And I looked back and I can't believe the carnage. I guess the motion picture that fire sent to me years later by the photographer who happened to take the film. One of a kind stuff. And I went to the hospital to visit my engineer a week or so after the crash. And he was all bandaged up. His hands and his face had been burned severely. And there was a headset at the bottom of his bed. And there was a nurse at bedside with a paper and pencil. And he was dictating a letter to his mother. And he said, "Dear Mom, don't worry about all this nonsense with those telegrams you're getting about me getting hurt." He said, my nurse is taking this, she's my secretary, she's doing this letter for me. And then he turned to me and he said, "Parker, how come they're talking about President Truman? Roosevelt's the president." I said, "Sal, you almost died the day Roosevelt did. Instead, you ended up here in the hospital. You crashed the day Roosevelt died." And when we were at this reunion in Stillwater, the Gazette came out, the paper, and television came out to hear the big pictures of us old guys. And they talk about that crash because the navigator, his life was saved by my engineer, and he saved several other lives in that crash. So wild things like that were happening all the time. After the war, I came home. I told you about got a job, this and that, put everything behind me until this phone call. But I went into education. I took advantage of the GI Bill, and I graduated from Hamlin. I never did get into teaching. I wish I had because I loved it. Taught Sunday school for years when I got older, and we would be up in the balcony with the TV watching Oral Roberts to get some of the religion. We had a lot of fun. I had a secret club. But then I got into the office equipment business, and that's where I spent the majority of my time. Now, I don't know how much time we have here, but any questions?
I have a question. Most people remember dates like when President Kennedy was shot or like 9/11. What can you tell us where, what you remember when you heard that Pearl Harbor was bombed, where you were and what was going through your mind, and then also the day the war ended?
Okay, the first one, I mentioned that I was out in the country hunting. It was a rural economy that I grew up with.
I came in late, so if you mentioned that before I walked in, I'm...
Oh, no,
okay.
Sorry, no.
Okay.
So, the minute those bombs dropped, this country was patriotic. There was no dissent. It was different. I remember that Monday after the bomb dropped in school, the PA system had President Roosevelt's address. And it was so emotional, and everybody was behind everybody else. Rationing came into effect. I've got a rationing book here showing the little stamps that we had to turn in the meat market, the grocery store. And I just noticed something in there. In one of the folds it says, "Food fights for freedom." This is, in a way, share and play square. And everybody did. Your second question again was?
Well, then when the war ended, you know, like where you were. So you said, were you still in high school when the war broke out?
Yes, I never finished my senior year of high school.
So can I ask how old you are?
I'm 86. I'd like to pick up those earlier.
Okay.
I'll be 86 the 14th of this month.
Okay.
So I'm still young. So, you know, one other thing. We are so proud, those of us that go out and speak to churches and schools and so forth, of the young people today. I wish everybody could see, you know, how good looking and handsome they were to start with, and then how great they are, and what good teachers and backup that we have. We're so proud, and we have people that are ready, and they're making their sacrifice for our effort. And nothing's lucky. Luck is security and sacrifice. And that's what's happening right now. Every war seems to blend into the next war. And so you kind of get closer. People are thanking us for our service all the time. And I went to a church meeting the other day at Trinity Lutheran out in Stillwater, and it was a Veterans Day deal. And they were highlighting the World War II guys. So first they asked those that fought in Korea to stand up in this crowd. Those in Vietnam, please stand up. And Iraq, there's a bunch of young people down there with their uniforms. They stood. And now, how about World War II? I think out of 300, 2 or 3 of us stood up. So, you know, they say 1,000 of us are dying a day, and I don't like that statistic. It's nothing. And so I spent my lifetime in the office equipment business. And did I answer that? Okay.
Yeah, and then the other question was when the war ended. Oh, that you said did you just answer that? Where were you over?
Yes, when the war ended, I was probably dealing blackjack in front of the tent. You know, we had nothing to do with the money. They replaced our American money when we got to Italy with Allied military currency. It looked like Monopoly paper. So and we had room and board and everything paid for. So we did a lot of gambling to pass the time away. So what happened, we found out that the war was over. May 8th, they signed it, and I was still on base. So then they began to check around to see to send us home. My ball turret gunner's dad had passed away just shortly after the war, so they flew him home with, you know, before the rest of us. Finally, it was our turn to head for home. And we went to a place in Italy called Gioia. It's right down by the hill. We got on a B-17 bomber, and we headed for America. And we landed in North Africa, Maracas. It's not far from Casablanca. We spent a day or 2 there. We took off heading for home. We went out to an island called the Azores. It's in the ocean out there, about 1,000 miles from Portugal, straight there. And on the way, when I found this after the war, my pilot, who was flying the aircraft, and the engineer south, my buddy that saved all these lives, he told me after the war, he said, you know, on the way to the Azores, we got a call to return back to Africa because the base is closed in on the Azores. You can't land. Well, Clancy was sleeping, so he said, hey, Clancy, we got to go back. But before we get to the point of no return, the Azores are closed in. He said, the heck with it. I'm going home to my wife, Jane. Well, I don't know all this. I'm dealing blackjack in the West. I don't know the chances we're taking. I'm still only 19. He was 21. So all of a sudden we're out there and we're circling. I don't know why we're circling. The Azores were closed in. We either had to ditch, meaning land on water, or wait till it was okay to land. Found out later in reading about the Azore Island that it was about 9 little mountains, and it was rural. It was a community out there. And it had 4 seasons in a day sometimes. Well, fortunately, it started to open up, and I stood up in the waist, and I could look out, and there was a mountain, and then it was a cliff, and this and that. The flaps came down to slow the aircraft, and we landed, and Gross was stopped, and it was a 10,000-foot runway, concrete. We landed on pierced steel plankings in Italy because it was so muddy that we couldn't build them, so they had to make their own on steel. Had my first glass of milk. We took off. I'm giving you more than you wanted, maybe.
No, this is great.
We took off for Newfoundland, and we landed in Newfoundland. From there we went to Bangerfield, Maine, and landed, and we were back in America. We kissed the ground, and we're so glad. And we had a 30-day convalescent leave. We could go home and be with our folks. So gratified and so forth. And my brother was in a hospital down in Topeka. He'd been wounded severely. He was in and out of hospital for years. And my dad bought a used car when I was home on furlough. My twin sister and I jumped into that old Ford and drove down to Topeka, where he was in the hospital, and taught his wife how to drive so she could get to see him. From there we went out to Santa Ana Army Air Base, and I was shipped all over the country. Finally discharged. I got off the bus in Ortonville, Minnesota, November 13th, 1945. Still 19. Went into my mother's crying arms and she's giving me a hug, and my dad's in the background, and I knew that tomorrow I'd have my butcher apron on again. He didn't realize I'd gone from boy to man, so We worked that out later. Yeah. He was a great guy. I miss him. He was in the First World War. Incidentally, when I was about 6 years old, I was at a decoration day. That's what they called Veterans Day when I was a kid, with my folks. And on the stage, there was an orator, Pat Cliff. I think he was the president of the Minnesota Legion at the time, talking about sacrifices, you know, all dedication. And on the stage were 3 old wooden chairs with 3 old guys with beards and mustaches and canes. They were Civil War veterans. Think about that. They're in their 85, 90. Now, someday, you guys are going to tell your grandchildren, we were at a speech one day out at Hill Murray, and this old guy got up and talked to us from the Second World War. See how these generations come together a little at a time. So, any more questions? Yes?
You mentioned how your friend's sister married his co-pilot in like 3 days. They said that was a bad idea.
Yeah, I didn't tell you, I don't think, about what happened, but did I? When we were over the target, and let's see, it was the 25th of March. Yes, we bombed a target called, it was in Linz, Austria. Linz, Austria was Hitler's hometown. That's where he took all the stuff that he put together and going to have a big museum there. Some of you history folks probably know it. And so just about 20 seconds before we hit the IP, turning in the bomb, Bud's plane with his brother-in-law, Captain Strudeman, had a shell exploded between engine number between these 2 engines. I'm up there about 4,000 feet. I didn't know it was Bud's plane. There's so many planes in it. And a tail gunner had a phenomenal view. He could see all this going because we got mixed up. But the shell exploded. The ship dropped down to about 2,000 feet. 2 or 3 parachutes came out, and the ship exploded. Now, who makes it and who doesn't? Bud was killed. His brother-in-law survived, bailed out. There was a kid from Vesta, Minnesota, in the Redwood County. Schuler was his name. He was killed. Everybody in the back, all the enlisted men except for the engineer, were killed. So, can you imagine the telegrams that went home? I'm a mother. My son-in-law and my son are missing in action. And I don't know what's going on. She had a blue star hanging in her window. The gold star means that we lost a veteran. Maybe you know that history. And there she is. Other. Then finally, the ones that bailed out, Schroeven and Al Bernard, who was from Phoenix, good friend, because we worked with that crew in training, survived. And the ones that survived went to prison camp. We were right over Germany, Linz, Austria. And the Red Cross would send them packages. That was part of the exchange of information between the enemy. And they also let the world know who survived that crash. You had to give, when you landed in your parachute, Germans picked you up or the enemy picked you up, you could only give them your name, rank, and serial number. And they knew from that, or the enlisted man, because the serial numbers told quite a bit, but that was all right. So then they found out the mother, the son-in-law was alive yet, and Bud was killed. When we were in gunnery school, Bud and I made a deal that either one of us got killed, we would go to and report to the parents, and let them know about what happened to us. Well, I didn't go. My conscience didn't bother because I know his co-pilot, his brother-in-law, made it home. He could tell. And, this is another question.
Do you still get together with your buddies?
Beg pardon?
Do you still get together with your buddies? You said you had gotten together with...
Yes, after I got this phone call, we had this reunion, and incidentally, it was so unique to be with these guys again. And when they came to my place in Stillwater, I had to bring their missions, their diaries, journals, anything that they had, and I put out tape recorders. And you can't believe the authentic stuff, first person singular, that's gone now, except maybe right this experience. And David Davis told me things that I've got on tape that are hard to believe, but you guys are old enough to handle it. So he said that one time I reported a fire between engine 3 and 4. And Clancy, the pilot, said to the co-pilot, "Woods, put out that fire." We had fire extinguishers on the air that were built into the wing. And there was a button for 1, 2, 3, and 4. Well, if you put the fire in number 3, you push 3, an extinguisher, CO2 would help, you know, close it down. Well, at first they feathered it. And what happened, according to Davis, when Woods got that statement, he just sat there. He didn't do anything. So the pilot said, "Woods, put out that fire." Didn't do anything. So the engineer stepped up, feathered the prop, hit the proper button, extinguished the fire. And I said, "Davis, why?" Well, he said, when we landed, I asked him, "Why didn't you put out that fire?" He said, "I didn't care if the whole ship blew up. Clancy chewed me out for breaking silence." Well, I'm sure that it was hard to believe this, that this could, but remember, I was only 19. The oldest guy was 23, and that was our navigator. And we horsed around, and who knows what would have happened. Strange story for me to hear. I got it on tape. And the things that we did, the things that happened. I don't know how much time we have here, but I just could rattle on.
We're nearly done.
Huh?
It's about, I think the bell's gonna ring.
Any minute. Well, you know, I thank you so much for listening.